Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Welcome to the March webinar this afternoon. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Today we are featuring a summary of the NASDA National Consortium Meeting, which took place just a few weeks ago in Orlando, Florida. And just to quickly go through the agenda for today's webinar, Justine Beaulieu is going to start us out with where we are at now, with just some basic background information for folks, just to get everybody on the same page and let everybody know where we are starting from. Next, Cindy Martel is going to talk about the challenges that we face, and after that, Abbey Williard and Mike Botelho will follow up with where we are going from here and next steps. And Abby's going to share the regional strategy that the groups discussed while they were at the meeting in Orlando, and Mike will give us some areas of how this connects to the work that NEASDA is doing. And at the end, we'll have plenty of time for some questions and answers and discussion. So please, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box at the bottom of the GoToMeeting, and we will get to those at the end, or we'll also unmute everybody and you can just ask the group, and we could have a discussion and question and answer session. So please, this is meant to be an opportunity to gain information from the folks that were at the meeting and you know, get some answers and just have some time for discussion. So please don't be shy. So with that, I will turn it over to Justine, and she will start us out with where we are now.
Hey everybody. First of all, I just wanted to say that this meeting was really interesting for me to go to as someone who's been doing just GAP trainings and just kind of dipping my toe into the PSA trainings. You know, I had helped a little bit with putting our material together to get the sub-awardee grant from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, but that was about it. So seeing FDA and the different state departments of agriculture and even some university folks like myself there was really an eye-opening experience as to how much work has gone into this process and how many challenges we still have ahead of us, but also how far we've come. So I'm going to talk about where we are now. I took a lot of notes during this meeting, so I'm going to kind of touch on everything briefly here. But if you need any more detail, feel free to email me and I can send you a copy. First, I wanted to talk about NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. They're the folks that actually put on this National Consortium meeting a few weeks back in Florida. They are a nonprofit organization that represents elected and appointed commissioners, secretaries, and directors of different departments of ag all over the country and the territories as well. They were founded back in 1916, and they're currently located in their main office is located in Virginia. Their mission is to grow and enhance agriculture by forging partnerships and creating consensus to achieve sound policy outcomes between state departments of agriculture, the federal government, and stakeholders. They've got 10 people on their board of directors. 5 of those people are executive committee members. 1 is an at-large member, and then the remaining people are presidents of the different NASDA regions. So they've got a Northeast region. The president in ours, it's Commissioner Walt, would come from the Maine Department of Ag. They've got a bunch of different policy priorities, and food safety is one of them. And they are responsible for that cooperative agreement with the FDA that the different state departments of agriculture have gotten to provide support for states rolling out the produce safety rule. So with that, that's basically the background on NASDA. I knew relatively little about them before this meeting, so that was really helpful to see that. These other bullet points that I have down are really just the highlights from a wonderful meeting. We got a Produce Safety Alliance update from Kristen Woods. She mentioned that they're having a soil summit on March 28th and 29th on soil amendments at Cornell. So, you know, email me for more information or email Kristen more information on that if that's something that you're interested in. She also reported that 19 states have had grower trainings between January 2015 and February of 2017. 1,700 growers have been trained in the U.S. so far. There is a place on Facebook where the Produce Safety Alliance has a page. I can send you the link, but it's also producesafetyalliance.cornell.edu. You can find the link on their page there too. And coming soon is a tool on the AFDO page. It's also linked on the TSA site that will help people find trainers in the country. And there will also be tools for hosting and engaging trainings. So that's the update from Kristen Woods. In terms of the on-farm readiness reviews, we talked a lot about those with Bob Ehart from NASDA. This was something that was first conceived of by NASDA. And their objectives originally were to offer a voluntary, non-regulatory, pre-inspectional readiness review, primarily for covered farms, but also for non-covered farms that wanted to get some extra help as well. They want to educate regulators about on-farm conditions. They want to familiarize non-qualified farms with the regulations if adequate funding is available for that. And they are developing a toolkit resource manual by gleaning info from past CAP education and the PSA curriculum. And they're saying that that should be ready around August of 2017. And their thinking is that an on-farm readiness review will be available once a farm has been to one of the Produce Safety Alliance trainings. They can participate in this on-farm readiness review, and it will be more of a self-assessment for the farmer. There was a lot of talk about the people there for the on-farm readiness review not having any paperwork at all, but just letting the farmer take notes as they walk through. So that way it's more of a self-assessment rather than an inspection or an audit per se. We got some perspective from an industry member, Paula Fisher. She gave a really great talk about the on-farm readiness reviews. She gave us some advice to incorporate them into PSA trainings. I took that to mean sort of a mock audit type of thing to include in the training. She did warn against moving too far towards apps. There was some talk about apps. She indicated that many growers do prefer paper, so not to lose sight of that. She touched on explaining the importance of the why to encourage farmers wanting to partner with you. A lot of times we kind of skip over that part, and sometimes simply an explanation of why can go a long way. And finally, just remembering that these farms are also homes. They were probably the growers' parents' homes at one point too, and it will be their children's homes. She reinforced that the farm is also a legacy. So just something really important to keep in mind for those who are going to be participating in the on-farm readiness reviews from Paula Fisher. In terms of the update on produce safety regulator training, there is an inspection course timeline. They're saying that the course walkthrough is scheduled for July 12th through 14th. That's in Tampa this year. There's a pilot course from August 14th to 17th this year in Salem, Oregon. There are some prerequisites for the produce inspections course. I don't know them off of the top of my head, but we can get that information too. And I have no idea what this note means, but I'm hoping some of you will. It says ER21 produce inspection training will eventually be replaced by this new training. So, in terms of what we heard about from the different states, I listed North Carolina, Vermont, Minnesota, Michigan, Colorado, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Washington, and Oregon. Some information we've heard before. Abby shared some of the work that she's been doing with the cooperative agreement. Tim Slawinski from Michigan talked about how he's not involving extension in the farm inventory in an effort to prevent jeopardizing any grower trust in extension. They're developing this, what they're calling the Michigan Safe Food Risk Assessment, which is similar to the OFRR, but in their eyes, they're conceiving it as being something a bit simpler. Steve Bornman from Colorado and Bobby Fletcher from Louisiana on the other hand, relied very heavily on extension for the farm inventory. Colorado's implementing a fellows program providing graduate students with on-farm food safety expertise. That was really interesting and something that I think we here in Maryland are looking to learn more about. Washington State, I wanted to mention, has an open produce safety position. That was as of a few weeks ago. I don't know what's happening with it currently, but there's that. Selena Tyson from North Carolina gave a very impressive presentation about her template for North Carolina. It's a really, really good model that she is going to post on the Food Shield website. She's also indicated that she's happy to be contacted and willing to share the blank template with anybody who emails with her. And if any of you are unfamiliar with how to get onto Food Shield, you do need to get permission. But you know, I did it and it wasn't hard at all. I just let them know that I was, you know, working with NECAFS and NASDA, and they gave me permissions. And then I emailed Doreen Gubby, who invited me to the NECAFS group. So if you have any questions on that, email Doreen or myself. I can help you there. Christina Sweet from Vermont developed a cross-divisional program with University of Vermont Extension. She says that she is also happy to share her scope of work adjustment template. And lastly, I have Valerie Gamble from Minnesota developed what she's calling the Progressive Enforcement Continuum. This looks really good. It's a nice graphic showing the different steps in an inspection program based on quality management systems. So that's what I have from the states, a little highlight there. For the carryover, okay, so farm inventory I have up next. Fazila Shakir from FDA did a nice presentation letting us know that the data collection standards that they're developing are about 80% complete. They're describing both necessary and optional data elements. They do recognize that states might be interested in collecting additional data elements to meet state-specific needs, but that's up to them. In the short term, states will likely need to share inventory data with FDA in a spreadsheet format while things are still being developed. That's totally fine. Long term, FDA is going to be working on developing a way to exchange data on a platform, allowing for a two-way communication between the states and the FDA. They're also working on a mobile app for the states and the FDA to use to validate inventory and eventually perform those inspections. And this was interesting to me. The FDA is also exploring the purchase of produce farm data. So that's it for the farm inventory. In terms of carryover requests for cooperative agreements, this was a really, really good discussion. A lot of questions with a lot of specific questions that I'm not sure people were completely satisfied with the answers to, but Alicia Schroeder from FDA had a lot of good things to say about carryover requests. I encourage you to look at the notes that are going to be on Food Shield about that, particularly in terms of the unliquidated versus unobligated funds. I think that's going to be a tricky process for a lot of people. Dr. Stephen Ostroff, he gave a nice talk, mainly emphasizing the difficulties that the water portion of the produce safety rule poses. There's a good chance that the rule will be reopened to look at the ag water portion. He also really discussed the importance of the produce safety network. So I'll go into that now. Produce safety network, it was created to support implementation of the produce safety rule. I was kind of hazy on that before this meeting. It's broken down into 4 different regions. There's the western, north central, northeast, and southern regions. They are working on a program and training development along with the on-farm readiness reviews. And they've got ORA and CIFSAN in each of those 4 regions. And they're actually still hiring. They're looking for 2 people in Washington and 1 person in Virginia. So that's the produce safety network. In terms of inspections, Jennifer Thomas from the FDA discussed their strategy for defining FDA versus state rules, inspection protocols, and plans for enforcement. And she also went into a little bit of detail about the pilot program that they're rolling out for 2018 and 2019. And then lastly, I have regional meetings. I think we're going to go into this a little bit in more detail in a little bit. From my personal perspective, we had an hour, but it felt like 20 minutes. It went by so fast, but it was really good to meet some other folks in the region. So yeah, it was a great meeting. I learned a lot. I met a lot of really great people. Some folks from the region. We went out to dinner, and that was great. And I'm really excited to collaborate and keep working on this as a region together. So thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Justine. And I don't know if Justine mentioned, and I didn't say, but she's from the University of Maryland. So just so if folks don't know where she's from. And actually, let me just pop in here right quick. We had a question which I think is actually relevant to this section. They're wondering if we can define what farm inventory means. I don't know if you necessarily want to do that, Justine, or if there's somebody else, just to give a little clarification of farm inventory.
I mean, I don't have a technical definition. Maybe Abbey can step in there, but this idea of the different state departments of agriculture as part of their cooperative agreement coming up with an inventory of the farms in the state, particularly the ones that are covered by the produce safety rule.
Yeah, hello?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
No, Abby, if you've got it, that's fine.
No, this is Elizabeth. Go ahead, Mike. You can answer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's the collection of farm information as simple as address, what they're growing, and what their possible revenue pattern is, so we can determine how they're covered by the rule. So, I mean, we've started that in Massachusetts. At every PSA training we give, everybody fills out a farm registration form. That's how we're starting that process.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Does that answer the question, or do we need to be more specific?
Well, I guess we can leave it there for now, and I'll let the question come through the chat box if we need more information. But I guess we'll move on to Cindy now, and then we can flesh that out a bit more if needed. So go ahead, Cindy, and Cindy is from West Virginia. So go ahead, Cindy, you're up.
Correct. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. Yes, I am with West Virginia with the State Department of Agriculture. And so one of the things that this opportunity presented was that there's not a lack of challenges, I don't think. I think the one clear message that I got down there, though, was that NASDA and the state's Departments of Agriculture and affiliated agencies, universities, everyone is very committed to making this work. And so that was really powerful for me in terms of being very positive. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong because I have not been in this a whole long time, but I think FDA is kind of shocked and dismayed. I think that they're probably used to administering programs that are more competitive. And so the fact that we're all able to get into a room and try and hash through a lot of this and share and be very cooperative in the process was something new for them, and I think it's going to go a long way with some of the challenges that we talked about in Florida. And I think that the other nugget that I got out of it was no two states are the same in terms of the nuances, but that overall the process of going through and meeting these challenges is part of this networking work so well. So I listed a whole bunch, and like I said, I could go on, but I think the things that I wrote here were kind of the themes that came through loud and clear on all 3 days. And that is that we all have administrative and procedural processes that aren't necessarily within our control within an individual agency, and that could be health or it could be agriculture. However, this process is being channeled in your state. An example is new hires. And part of it relates to point number 3 there, where we were not the only state, but there's been a lot of administrative changes. There's been a lot of new commissioners, a lot of new leadership and executive changes. There's also been a pretty tremendous turnover in terms of legislative leadership in each of the states. So that's creating a challenge because it's all about having to re-educate those, to educate those folks rather, and kind of redirect how they want that done. And also whether or not they're constrained by law. So that, you know, really piggybacks into a lot of our other issues in terms of things like expenditures and what we're able to do, and the whole idea that it's really not going as quickly as the timeline probably would like it to be. So we're having to kind of adapt and reinvent at every step of the stage. So I think that that's a challenge. I think we're working through it, and that there's no one way to fix it all, but that we're at least got it out in the air and open, and I know that it can be very frustrating on a lot of levels, and so supporting each other is critical, and that's what happened down in Florida. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not the funding was going to be there. It's kind of scary for several of the states to bring on somebody to do this and not be assured that we're going to have that multi-year funding to be able to accomplish the goals that we have set forth. They were very upfront with us at FDA that, you know, we're looking at the Farm Bill process and all that good kind of thing. So when you leverage that with the fact that states have shrinking budgets also and huge constraints in terms of what the future may hold, that is a challenge that we're all facing and trying to adapt to. We're being requested to do a quick outlay of expenditures, which was touched on a little earlier, and I think we'll talk about a little bit more. But you know, a lot of the state purchasing procedures, depending on where you are, may not be conducive to that. And also, you know, we need to be prudent. We want to make sure that if we're questioned, we're accountable. So that's a challenge. You know, that whole fear factor in terms of our producers and our processors. How do we introduce that produce safety rule and preventative control programs into the production curriculum? I know we talked about, exclusively talked about produce, but we also know that there's overlap with the preventative controls, and so we've got some folks out there that are going to get a double dose of this. And so how do we introduce it to them, and how do we provide and structure our programs within our states to make that user-friendly in addition to accomplishing what the legislative mandates are? I think there was a question about the role of the regional centers, and I put that in there not to be critical, because I think that, you know, the Northeast, we've had our meetings, and we've got a really strong network that Chris has put together. But there are, I heard talk amongst others in other regions that the regional center role may not be as clearly defined. And I know that they're each kind of approaching it in their own different way. So just maybe some synergy. If one of the regions is doing something that the other could take advantage of, that might be useful. We have not started, and they talked about this in Florida, that they had identified it as a priority, and they had not done as much work as they wanted, and they being NASDA, but just that whole regulatory and legislative authority. I know that in our state, we're going to face an uphill battle with a legislature that's not very keen at this point on doing any kind of additional rulemaking. And I sense that we're not the only state, nor do I think we're the only region that has a huge variety of ways that that can all be implemented, and we all know that that's a huge part of the cooperative agreement in terms of what we're supposed to be spending our time and energy on. So I think that whole kind of decision tree concept of, if we do it this way and we encounter a roadblock, what are our alternatives, what are our options for that? Again, you know, FDA, like I said, I think they're a little somewhat dismayed that we cooperate together and that we speak to each other, and that whole NASDA mechanism that they have that actually produced the symposium. I'm not so sure that they've seen a group like that. I think that's a positive thing, but I also, as someone who's relatively new to this, the vernacular, you know, CIFSAN, and I mean just that whole, how it all integrates, and you know, who am I speaking to within the agency? What's the layers? What's the structure there? Can be overwhelming to folks, especially as we start to bring in other agencies to help us with the cooperative agreement, for example, our health department. In terms of expectations and procedures, the reporting, program implementation, for a lot of us that have focused a lot on USDA grants, you know, ERA Commons is a whole new ballgame to us. Also, I don't feel like we have a really good template about what they're looking for in our reporting. And so I think there's a challenge there for us to figure out what FDA wants us to report and how they want us to report. I had lots of folks that I spoke with, and they were asking me those questions, and I had the same question of them. So I think that's a challenge for us in terms of we want to do a good job as states to implement the cooperative agreement, but we don't have as much of a roadmap as we have with some of the other programs that we're all used to dealing with. The organizational and structural implementation based on those funding questions, how is that going to work into our department? How can we achieve our goals of sustainability of this program in terms of regulation and personnel? A lot of states were asking that. They're asking to bring on a new position, but what if funding gets cut dramatically at either the federal or the state level? How can we minimize the impact of that, and making sure that there's a really good plan so that we can actually justify the development of this program within our individual states. The fact that there's a lot of the same questions out there that we're not getting a whole lot of answers on very quickly, and I think that the challenge is that we're unfamiliar with waiting for long periods of time. When you ask a question, it's taking upwards of 9 months to get an answer. And then the huge thing that I heard the whole time there was, the water quality. A, that it's unclear. B, that the interpretations as they exist now make it very cost prohibitive in some scenarios. And thirdly, are they going to open it up? Are we going to have an opportunity to kind of quote unquote fix it? So I think that water question is the huge challenge. The integration of the two programs, the Produce Safety Rule and GAP, which is a model that I know this group has presented. I believe Massachusetts and Maryland are doing similar kinds of things, and we've adopted that philosophy too. We're working towards that. Building up resources, whether you're going through extension or someone else, for the folks out in the field, the folks on the ground. Who is that producer talking to make the right production decisions about GAP? We have to train them before they can go out and do that. So working with our extensions and those kinds of things are all critical, and I think each state does it a little differently, but at the same time, just getting those different ag service provider groups up to speed was an issue that a lot of folks mentioned. And then conversely, educating our buyers. A lot of them still don't know the difference between GAP and Produce Safety Rule, and so they just throw their hands up and say, okay, we're going to just require a third-party audit. So how we can get that integrated is a challenge, and I think it's a producer and buyer interface that needs to happen, and that folks are finding quite challenging. And then also that whole idea of regional network development. We made a commitment as West Virginia, as being the southernmost member of the Northeast, to participate, and that's great. Our coordinator Jeremy will be participating in the soil school that was referred to earlier at Cornell, and so just how can we develop that network and make it for resource sharing, and continue with that, because as the previous speaker mentioned, 20 minutes was our meeting was an hour, but it felt like far shorter time than that, and there's lots of things that we can collaborate on. So how can we get that information into your hands, and that's the challenge. And then I'm welcome to anybody else's thoughts on what their interpretation of Florida was, apparently in the question and answer session. Is that correct?
Yep, that would be great. Thanks, Cindy. So actually, let's just jump right into Abby's. She's going to talk about that regional network that both Cindy and Justine referenced as a great opportunity for sharing. So I will advance, and Abbey Williard from the Vermont Agency of Ag will pick it up from here.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So I I think Justine and Cindy both did a great job sort of describing the complexity of the issues and the variety of topics that were shared during the consortium meeting in Orlando. And we had 1 hour for our regional breakout. So much of the conversations were happening on a national level, and individual states were sharing their strategies and best practices as models to be considered. But we did have an opportunity to kind of break out as regional groups, and so the NECAFS region got to spend an hour together, and it was the 12 states were represented there that were at the consortium gathering. So we had Maryland and New York, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Delaware, Connecticut, Maine, New Jersey, and West Virginia. Hopefully I didn't forget anyone. And we kind of structured our conversation in 3 different ways. One, talking about some of the challenges that we're facing both as states and educators and extension groups. We had both ag departments and public health entities there as the cooperative agreement principal investigators. So there was a lot of variety within the region as to who was responsible for that cooperative agreement. I'll kind of go through those challenges, and then we sort of simultaneously were looking for opportunities to overcome any of those challenges. And then, as you'll see in the slide, and I'll end there, are some of the recommendations that our group came away with to share sort of with the larger NECAFS group, so per this webinar. So there were clearly some questions about how, you know, the NECAFS purpose being for both the produce safety rule and preventive controls for human food could sort of connect with this cooperative agreement that was being discussed so intensely, since that cooperative agreement is only for the produce safety rule. And so really, you know, questioning how those 2 rules interact and how we work to connect them. Again, as I mentioned, there were some states that are led by the public health department, primarily in Rhode Island and New Hampshire, and in some cases feel a little more disconnected from the agricultural community. So looking to either their ag departments or neighboring states where they could sort of create some sort of meaningful mentorship relationships. We also talked about the incredible need of the industry for capital infrastructure assistance, and thinking about, as the industry works to understand and then seek compliance with the rule if required by their operation, what kind of infrastructure improvements or upgrades will be necessary on their farm. And so thinking about where might those resources come from. And there was some conversation, as I think both Justine and Cindy mentioned, around the relationship between GAP and the new produce safety rule requirements. And so there was questions about, you know, whether GAP staff can do produce safety rule inspections, and, you know, what about this concept of providing education and technical assistance while also conducting a regulatory role. So there are a lot of opportunities to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. We also have all recently learned that the water standards, ag water standards, are being considered for revision. And so what should be our communication with the industry now that these provisions to the produce safety rule are in flux? And then we talked a little bit about culture and the fact that, you know, there are some state and extension education folks that are intentionally wanting to keep some distance from this cooperative agreement, especially if that entity is engaging in the compliance and enforcement role, so that they can maintain that sort of autonomous, sort of educational only role with the industry. So just really being really sensitive about perceptions from the industry about who they can connect to and communicate with honestly. And then lastly, I think there was a lot of fatigue after 3 days of reporting requirements and budget conversations and training needs and new committees and additional work teams and documents and templates that need to be created. And I think there were some states that kind of came to that breakout meeting saying they really need to focus on the development of the program on their own state, at their own state level, and engaging with the industry, not necessarily thinking regionally right now. So I think there's some pulling back and sort of individual states feeling like they got to kind of tend to business at home. So all those were sort of, well documented and well, I think, kind of multiple states feeling similarly about a lot of those challenges. A few of the opportunities that were shared that then we started to roll up into the recommendations were wanting to make sure that we were connecting to groups that existed across the region. So whether that was the National Farmers Union and other organizations, that we also wanted to make sure that we were either presenting at or even taking advantage to gather as a regional group at already scheduled meetings. And so the Harvest New England Growers Conference that happens annually in Manchester, New Hampshire in December as a great opportunity to kind of maybe explore adding on some time to get together as a NECAFS region. We also talked about the opportunity that there are certain states that are further along in their program development at the state level and might be really willing and interested to offer some sort of training, shadowing, or opportunities to kind of engage the other state staff across the region to learn from their process or their approach, become familiar with sort of how those relationships have been built in their state. So kind of taking advantage of other states' successful strategies. There was a statement was made that it's really important that as we develop our trainings and we engage in future regulatory trainings as directed by FDA, that we continue to message the importance of having both regulators and industry in the room concurrently, so that we're both hearing the same messages, we're both getting the same direction, and that we have an opportunity to kind of build that relationship with one another in those training settings. And then someone suggested, as we had talked about capital infrastructure needs, what about looking federally to the Farm Bill or other sources where we may be able to regionally access some capital infrastructure funds? So it was a great conversation. I think we could have spent a half a day as a regional group in these types of discussions, and again, our time was limited, but we did kind of put forth, I think, as a group, a few recommendations that while we didn't think we could meet quarterly because of states needing to really focus on, building programs back home, there was a desire to consider meeting biannually, so twice a year as a region, where we made sure that we had educators and state staff, as well as FDA's Produce Safety Network staff as they come on board as the subject matter experts around the rule, and some of which will be located regionally in our states, to get together and sort of talk about some best practices, share resources, template documents, and kind of make sure that we stay well connected. Again, we brought up the priority of attaching some of our produce safety rule educational opportunities to already scheduled events, as opposed to necessarily going out and scheduling all new meetings. FDA has uses Food Shield as a portal for sharing resources. They committed at that meeting and have since created a regional page, and that the Northeast region can use, and we can post things, and we can chat, and we can use as a pretty dynamic communication portal. And so that page exists, and Owen, who I hope is on the line from New Hampshire, has agreed to be the administrative lead on that, and so maybe he can touch base with all of you on the call during this webinar about that process. And then we started to get really specific about, could we meet again soon? Many states, or all states, have cooperative agreement funding that they're looking to draw down as much of many of those resources as possible by the end of June, and whether it might make sense to have the NECAFS regional group meet again to discuss sort of regional policy opportunities and our strategic plan development, and build a meeting and those expenses to cooperative agreements. and Concord, New Hampshire was even thrown out as a location. So everyone should probably have been seeing the Food Shield invitations and communication by Owen about trying to get a sense of people's availability for at least maybe a planning call in April and a meeting in the next couple of months. So I think that's anything else that others that were a part of that breakout group would want to add.
Do we want to pull in? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Abby.
Mike. Yeah, so
yep.
What we thought this might be a nice opportunity, and Michael Botelho can kind of lead us through the beginning of this process, is whether some of these priorities or recommendations out of this regional breakout, how that dovetails with NECAFS priorities, and if this sort of fits nicely with kind of what, as an organization, we were already thinking of engaging in.
Great. And so, Mike, if you want to jump in now, Mike is from the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. Michael Botelho.
Hi. Hello, everybody. I just want to start off by really expressing to everybody how excited I am to work with the region. I mean, we have a wonderful, wonderful group of people, intelligent, pragmatic, are asking the right questions, are really willing to collaborate and work hard to, you know, deploy effective programs to support our constituents. So the timing of this call is interesting as we talk about next steps. I'm in the middle of giving a PSA training with UMass. We split up the modules. I do half, Lisa McKee does the other half. So a lot of the things that we're talking about in these two slides that were presented, we're already field testing out here in Massachusetts. So in terms of our next steps, obviously I think the focus is going to be on strategic plan development and the annual reports. As Cindy mentioned from West Virginia, I don't think we're getting a whole lot of guidance when it comes to specific reports or templates. I don't feel insecure with that process. I think we'll stumble through it and we'll be fine once we get through this first iteration of the cooperative agreement reporting. You know, every state is at a different stage of development, and I, for one, really appreciate the national coordination, but more and more I'm realizing that the regional collaboration is far more powerful. I think the personal relationships that we develop through organizations like NECAFS and NEASDA just produce quicker paced work. It's difficult when you're trying to do it nationally. I'm not at all detracting from what NASDA is doing with the framework. I think it's crucial and critical. But I also think that that regional leveraging of what's happening in respective states next door or slightly down the 95 corridor are important. So based on some of the things that were brought up, I don't want to make this a Massachusetts-specific update, but I do want to mention a few things that we're doing in Massachusetts and would love to find out if other people want to participate or be included. We are doing our first buyer workshop in April. We are working with the Vermont Department of Agriculture to have them in attendance, and we'll be bringing in all the major buyers, wholesalers, distributors, qualified end retailers, and a few large direct market farms that then buy produce from other farms in attendance, where we're going to train them on our combined program here in Massachusetts, which is the obviously combining the produce safety rule with the USDA harmonized gap checklist. And we would love to have people, if you're wanting to join and you're able to join, we'd love to have you on board. We talked about the water quality issue, and I think at the trainings that we give, the PSA trainings, I spend a lot of time talking about regional collaboration and a lot of time talking about NECAFS and how NECAFS is going to support all the program development and deployment in the states within the region. And it's wonderful to see the response from farmers when they not only appreciate that coordination, but are looking forward to doing things here on a regional basis. So once again, I just want to reiterate the power of this group and the collaborative efforts that it will produce eventually. So I am unfortunately on a time constraint. I have to be back in 3 minutes. So I'd like to open it up to questions or anything specific that I might be able to answer.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we'll jump right ahead. So if there, Chris just unmuted the entire group, so if you have a question, please take the opportunity to unmute yourself individually and speak up, and everybody on the webinar will hear you. So it's open if there's any questions.
And folks can also type questions into the chat box if that's helpful for any reason.
Okay, so I've got a question to the other states. I might as well go first since I only have a few minutes here. We're all trying to leverage resources and development of like strategic plans and the annual reports and some of the strategies. And we try to do that at the national level. And ART has that folder sharing system where one state puts in and other states can look at and model off that reporting. Are we able to do that at the regional level and maybe move a little bit quicker, or do we stay with the national structure at the NASDA level, or can we contribute to both?
This is Owen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think we could do it at the regional level and at the national level, or just one or the other. I mean, either way it can be done on Food Shield, if that's what everybody wants to do.
Boy, that produced a lot of dialogue.
Are there any other reflections from folks who were at the meeting in Orlando who wanted to bring anything up that wasn't discussed, or to elaborate further on some points that were made?
This is Cindy. I'll go ahead and just this is just a statement. I don't think I have a solution. But one of the things, like for our state, sometimes I feel like we do nothing but cannibalize or borrow other folks' stuff. So part of it is I don't have a lot of content to contribute, if that makes any sense. So I guess I'm wondering if we're on the same boat of waiting for those templates to come out, or waiting for those examples to come out. And so I don't know if that's something that a sharing resource would help with, or if we're going to have problems with content, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, Cindy, Michael from Massachusetts, that's understandable. I mean, on the flip side of the coin, I'm doing things here in Mass that I don't take this the wrong way. I try to do slightly under the radar. For instance, we're in the process of finalizing the combining of the inspectional lists, and we're doing that on our own, and we're going to field deploy under our own voluntary farm food safety program to field test, which isn't the OFRR process, it's our own. But I feel that we'll be able to learn a lot from that, just like in given the PSA training currently today and yesterday back-to-back on the ag water module, particularly when it's open for public discussion again, how I present that and the reaction I get from growers. I would love to be able to share that in some way if it's useful for everybody, but I don't feel like I don't want to put things out and have people feel they have to follow the Massachusetts model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I can speak for our state. We wouldn't be offended at all, but I also understand that that work product may not be something that you feel like you can share. So, like I said, I'm sensitive to both ways, and that whole idea that I kind of feel like I'm coming to the table to graze when folks share, and I appreciate it, and would encourage folks. But right now, we don't have any content until we have some idea of a direction to go in with a new man and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Right, and Cindy, let me clarify for you and the rest of the group. I have absolutely no problem sharing what we may be doing slightly under the radar with the regional group. And that's why I asked that question about regional sharing versus national. I have no problem doing it regionally. Nationally, I tend to become a little bit I mean, we had an FDA official at my PSA training yesterday. So,
Yeah,
you know, and that was an interesting interaction, and they asked a lot of questions because they heard the Massachusetts model for the first time, at least in terms of this PSN member, and the feedback was positive. But then I thought, you know, there's a way to get that out regionally, not in a confidential fashion, but just specific to our region and how we can leverage what's going on in each state for our collective benefit.
Yep, we're on the same page, and that was, I think that might be part of the root of the question that you're asking, and we're certainly willing to share whatever we've got, but we don't have a lot, and I would assume there may be some other states that don't have a lot either.
This is Owen from New
Yeah,
York
Mike.
again.
Sorry. This is Justine from Maryland. Oh, and do you want to go first?
Go ahead. No, you go.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mike, like as someone who's done four PSA trainings now, I would love to know how you're explaining the water rule and the fact that it's all going to be up in the air again soon, possibly.
Would you be surprised if one of the strategies I use is a photo of Kramer in the bathtub with lettuce?
No, not from you.
Very creative, very creative.
Yeah, we can
So
talk about
related to that, this is Abby again. We had a call yesterday with FDA to start to roll out what the performance measures are for state cooperative agreements, and so those that are engaged in the cooperative agreements will be on that webinar next week. And the same question around the ag water standards came up in that call, and it was a request was made to FDA that they need to craft, we're asking that they craft some language that states can use in this interim time while the ag water standards are being considered for revision, so that we're using a consistent message, we're clear about what we're telling growers, and likely telling them not to be engaging in capturing those baseline standards, baseline samples right now, and sort of waiting to get a sense of what those ag water standards will end up being in the final rule. So I hope we see something from FDA soon about that.
You tell them I'm calling back. I'm on a conference call.
Yep.
Owen, did you have something you wanted to say? Yeah, go ahead.
So when we had our call with NASDA, I think it was on the 14th, it came up that who do you want to allow access to the Northeast region on Food Shield? And that was kind of a question I wanted to put to the Northeast region. And I mean, it sounds like we probably just want to keep it to ourselves, and I think that's fine. We don't really necessarily need to share that part of Food Shield with FDA and with NASDA. Is that what I'm hearing correctly? I'm not sure if that's what you guys want to do.
Sorry, Owen, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
So the question came up from NASDA and the FDA about if they can have access to our work group on Food Shield, or if we just want to keep it amongst ourselves.
So if we're comfortable having either the Produce Safety Network staff from FDA or other FDA staff with access to that site.
That is the question.
Okay, thank you.
So this is
what are people's
Cindy.
reactions to that?
Yeah, this is Cindy, and my first reaction was, yeah, I didn't think there was a problem with it, but after hearing Michael and his scenario, you probably want to reconsider that. You know, and if we look at that as a possible vehicle to share ideas and thoughts, then we probably want to think about those implications.
Are there any
I
other
don't-
reflections from the group on that? Go ahead, Owen, sorry.
I mean, yeah, it's. I don't think. I mean, I don't know how confidential it would be. I mean, it's an FDA website, right? So I don't know how, if it's 100% or anything like that, but I don't think. I mean, I think they're okay with not having access if that's what we want to do as well. That's what I got from that call with NASDA.
So this is Abbey. Yeah, I think that's true. I feel like if we felt there was an advantage to any of the Northeast regionally focused FDA staff to be connected to that site, whether they could answer questions or they could, you know, I don't know, share things with us, then we could authorize them access to our page. If we don't think we're necessarily looking for them to interact and engage with us at that level, I'm not sure that it's necessary, and we could still get general documents off of the Food Shield main page that FDA posts. Yeah. So it's not like we lose access to those resources. So it doesn't sound like anyone is super interested or vocalizing a desire to have FDA staff access our Northeast regional page. So maybe we keep it sort of to states and extension and other ed partners for the time being.
Sounds good.
And maybe people can, people can object, kind of that negative polling concept. So you could object or voice concern if you feel differently.
Great. Are there any other reflections from the meeting that anybody wants to bring up who was there, or questions for the group about the meeting in Orlando? You can either put it in the chat box or unmute yourself and speak up to the group.
Elizabeth, this is Chris Callahan. First of all, I just want to thank all the presenters today. This is an incredibly succinct summary of what I imagine was a pretty busy discussion, even given the short period of time you were together down there. So thanks everybody for contributing to that and organizing the thoughts so well. I really appreciate it. The one thing I wanted to reflect on was the summary slide of sort of regional next steps, and most of that seems incredibly well aligned with the programmatic scope of NECAFS, and we obviously look forward to being a partner in that and pursuing most of each of those items. So thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Any other reflections? Yep, go ahead.
This is Abbey. So again, I had more of a question for the group and for you, Chris, maybe, or Elizabeth, just as we think about organizing a regional group that's kind of focused around the shared opportunity and misery of these cooperative agreements, how does that kind of connect to the work of the NECAFS group? And we kind of touched on that piece of there being priorities that NECAF is trying to identify as focus areas for the region, and I would just love to see how we could kind of blend these two conversations as states are, creating their strategic plan for the next 5 years or reporting for at least the next year of priorities for their state program development, since so much of that is around outreach, education, and technical assistance, and eventually, in most cases, inspection and compliance and enforcement, just trying to think of how we can kind of share the communication with the NECAFS priorities.
Yeah, I think, Abby, as a first step, I think we're all sort of flowers in two soils, so there's a lot of sort of work being done in parallel in different groups, and I think it's more of this sort of webinar, this sort of phone call, just looking for the opportunities where there's overlap and for communication and sharing. I think the idea of, I think I saw biannual in-person meetings where we can have more in-depth and in-person conversations makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing that we're seeing a real opportunity for is in the working groups within NECAFS and having some really topically focused work and activity among interested folks. And so one of those, for example, could be some of these templating or standard rules that you all are working on under the cooperative agreements at the state level. So if there is network facilitation that's helpful via NECAFS toward that goal, we're certainly, that was one of the intents of the project, was to establish that structure to enable that. So happy to continue exploring that together and look for ways to coordinate. Did you have other ideas?
No, I was just, no, I think that sounds reasonable and makes sense. I just wanted to kind of open up the conversation if there were thoughts from anybody.
Yeah, and actually I will elaborate a little bit on what Chris was talking about. So, you were mentioning out of the Orlando meeting the discussion of some working groups or additional conversations that people are having off to the side of the larger meeting. And we within NECAFS have been talking about the same thing, so I don't see a need to duplicate the same effort. So if there's similar objectives for working groups or additional breakout groups, that's definitely something that I think I should touch base with you guys on, and we can articulate where there's overlap, and then like you said, blend those efforts so that it's not two groups trying to do something at the same time, rather having that collaborative work together. So I think that that's great to have heard that and hear that that's something that you guys have been thinking about, and we'll follow up on those.
Yeah, great.
Wonderful. Any other questions or thoughts?
This is Owen again from New Hampshire. I wanted to say that I think it's really important that we meet in person, and for me it's a lot easier to communicate that way, and so I'm really looking for some more people from the Northeast group to help out with the planning, because there's going to be a meeting for you guys, and if you want some input on what exactly we're going to do at the meeting and discuss so that we have a successful meeting, that would be really great if some other people could let me know if they want to be involved in the planning stage, which will be in April, for the meeting potentially in May in Concord, New Hampshire.
Oh, and this is Chris. Do you have a sense for what the overall focus of the meeting would be, or is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking, yes.
Yeah, okay. So for example, I mean, again, just one of the key points of departure between the state cooperative agreements and the regional center is, we have we're focused both on the produce safety rule and the preventive controls for human foods rule, and so just bearing that in mind, if it's, we're here to support both, but just it would help us understand who from the regional center network might have interest in participating, if there's a specific produce focus, for example.
I think there is a produce focus.
Fair enough.
I would believe so. For me, anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know about anyone else.
Yeah, yeah. And that's fine. Just being clear about it. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd say count Elizabeth and I in on at least initial planning discussions on that. We certainly are in support of in-person discussions on these topics.
Cool. And I don't know if I have your contact information, so maybe Abby could get me that.
I'll hunt you down. Don't worry about it. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, Owen, if you wanted to put your contact information into the chat box,
Okay.
people wanted to reach out to you, that might be great. And also, as you can see, I put the contact information up on the screen for the presenters today, so as they all mentioned, if you had follow-up questions, you can feel free to reach out to them individually. Great, thank you, Owen. So anything else?
So this is Abby again. I mean, I'm happy to just sort of share a few of my parting thoughts, and then Elizabeth and Chris and others can do the same if you wish. Every time we have these national consortium meetings, and this time in particular because it was the first time that we really had a very strong extension and university presence along with state departments, it was a reminder to me, and then FDA brings it up numerous times throughout the few days together, that this is such an unbelievably monumental time in that there's been this much money committed to one single effort in one cooperative agreement, that there's this much participation and engagement between FDA and states and extension and university educators, that we have kind of this opportunity for individual state program development or individual program development at the state level, while we're also, obviously seeking nationwide coverage and consistency, and that we really don't seem to have a fundamental difference of opinion about the importance of this work. I think the how we go about it and where to put the resources and what the budget exactly looks like and how do we make the timeline work and then how do we effectively reach the industry are all specific questions that everyone is kind of grappling with at the state level and then nationally at the NASDA and FDA levels. But it does really feel like, as much as I can get frustrated at times and feel overwhelmed by the work that's left to do, we are all kind of pulling in the same direction, and at least that's my sentiment. And there's a lot of talk about making sure we tell the good story, that there's a lot kind of at stake. There's a lot of attention to this money and to this effort because of its vastness and because of its unique nature. But with that said, we also have such an opportunity to do something different than has been done before. And having been involved in this for the last 4 years, I'm remain excited to see that continue to happen. So I think there's a lot to do, and I think there's a lot of orchestration and partnership development that's left to be worked out, but I remain optimistic.
Hear, hear. Thanks, Abby.
Sure.
Yes, I second that. I've heard that.
Great, thanks. Any other parting thoughts? I liked that, leaving on a positive note. Okay, well, great. I think that wraps it up for today, and I just want to thank again Abby, Cindy, Justine, and Michael for the presentations, and thanks all for joining us this afternoon. And if you have colleagues who couldn't make it, we will post it on the website in a few days. So thanks again, and have a great afternoon and a good weekend all.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Elizabeth.